more listening than anything in my profession, but yeah.
And you're both Pisces, so.
Oh, really? Oh my
Yeah.
God. I feel like I could pick your brain about so much.
Oh, yeah. He's good for that.
So where do you want to start?
Yeah, well, I'm really interested in kind of like your life before everything, before you had cancer, before everything really shifted, and how, those pieces of who both of you were before kind of made you who you are now.
Mm-hmm.
So where do you feel like it all starts?
Well, it starts right here in Oregon. I grew up the son of two mountain climbers and just had this wonderful childhood climbing the mountains in the Cascades when all the other kids would come back to school and be bored because, it rains here a lot in Portland, and said all they got to do all weekend long was watch the Scooby-Doo marathon. I'd climbed a mountain. And so I felt really kind of privileged to be the son of two adventurers like that, because there were always crazy stories. And sometimes being out in the cold or being wet all weekend in the woods wasn't that much fun, but I always thought it was. And so grew up with that, and then got to playing a lot of soccer, and had scholarships all over the US, and picked a tiny little Bible college in Kansas just on a lark, because to me it sounded like Eternal Church Camp, and those were always fun. And it was awful. I mean, the whole town, they said there were 500 people in town. I don't think so. There was one convenience store, a grocery store, a bank, and a rest home and a gas station, and that was it. The rest was just wheat and rednecks, and it was pretty awful. But I ended up meeting my first wife there, and she was just a cute little Kansas farm girl. And so when we decided to get married, she said, you really need to think about this, because just because I'm marrying you doesn't mean I'm going to go back up to Oregon. I'm really close to my family. And so if you want to marry me, you're going to have to promise me to stay here. And so I came back to Portland for about 8 months, and I was so young and lovesick that I decided to put myself in exile for love. So that's what I did, and taught for 20 years. But 13 of those 20 years, I went back to school at night and got my license, my master's and my license to become a therapist. And so for 13 years, I taught in the morning and or during the day, and then at the night did therapy. So I was really, really busy. And after about 10 years in private practice, it really started to boom. And so then in 2002, I left teaching, even though I really didn't want to, because I was an art teacher. And it was so much fun. I just absolutely loved it. But this was before kids had cell phones. So I might not love it as much anymore. But anyway, so things were going really, really well. And I was super busy, and I had started writing an advice column, and that started going around to small town newspapers across the US. And so that was making me really excited. I was kind of where in 2005, I was kind of where I am right now, which is kind of weird, but I was starting to speak, and I was starting to make a lot of really good connections, starting to make some good money, starting to really go national. And then in 2007, I just finished a book that I'd been working with the local community college on for 2 years, mostly 2,000 girls, and because I wanted to get on the front side of acquaintance rape. And so I wrote a book teaching the girls and learning their sexual practices and their dating practices and how it put them at risk for date rape. And so I wanted them to learn the FBI profiles for acquaintance rape, because almost 9 out of 10 rapes now are people the girls already know and trust.
Okay.
And you don't hear that much. And all the way from about 1980, the FBI have these profiles, these 4 profiles for acquaintance rapists, but you never hear about it. And I did a massive search and couldn't find anything on it. There was all sorts of stranger danger rape books and a couple not so good acquaintance rape books, but there was nothing with these 4 profiles. And so I worked with the girls, and then even took a lot of surveys of the guys, and ended up with, I thought, a pretty good book at the time. And it was called A Girl's Guide to Psychos, Players, Punks, and Pervs, How to Become the Ultimate Guy Detector. And was really excited. I thought that would be my life's work, because it was starting to get into colleges, and I was starting to go talk to college girls. And I was starting to work with Mothers Against Drunk Driving, because I developed something called the DD Plus. I felt like the designated driver wasn't enough, because what would happen is the designated driver would take girls to these parties, they'd get drunk, guys would be circling like sharks and isolate them, go rape them, and then the designated driver would take these traumatized little bodies home. And so DD Plus stood for Designated Driver, and the plus stood for Person Looking for Unsafe Situations. The DD also made sure that the girls weren't isolated and taken off. And it was going real well. And then I went in for an elective knee surgery just at the very start of 2007, and found out I had leukemia. And at first, they only gave me about 6 weeks, because I had both acute and chronic, and they'd never seen anything like it. And so it scared me to death. And I was really, really sick for a year, and almost died because my immune system was so suppressed, almost died from pneumonia in that next summer of 2008. And yeah, so things were pretty hard, but then I got better and bounced back and was doing well and picking up steam again. And late August, early September of 2009, my wife, Mary, was starting to have problems. Her face dropped, and we found out she had one of the largest brain tumors the neurologist had ever seen. And there was no hope to extract it, even with laser-guided surgery. And 52 days later, she was dead, 15 days before our 30th anniversary. And that was such a blow and I was so grief-stricken, because I felt like I'd given up my whole life in Oregon and everything I wanted to do to love her. And, I went through all the typical grief symptoms of being really angry, thinking, I gave 30 years for what? What did it get me? Just terrible thoughts like that. And so I ended up with leukemia, and this time it brought with it a side order of lymphoma, and just kept getting sicker and sicker. And so I gave up my practice there, even though it was booming and it made no sense, because I'd worked on it for 20 years. But to move back home to live what I thought might be my last couple years, just close to my family. And so that's kind of my background story.
Oh.
Goodness. I don't know how you
Here it is.
Yeah. Oh, well, it is. It's emotional.
Yeah, it was.
I mean, every time I hear it, it's like, oh my gosh, it's just so
true.
Well, the
yeah.
ironic thing too is I was considered a grief expert in the Midwest. I had done seminars and written articles and gone different places as the
different when it happens to you.
expert on grief. And when it happened, I thought, I don't know anything. And I even called a couple people up. Remember when you were hurting? I'm sorry. What I offered you was
Aww.
junk. And they're like, Dean, we know you didn't know, but we know you know now. And I'm like,
Probably just one of those things you don't know till you go through it.
Yeah, and it was so many blows all at once. Most people in their lifetime don't have that much grief or that much happening. So I
Yeah.
can't even imagine.
Yeah.
I hope you never have to.
Goodness.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so that's
Yeah.
me.
Hmm. Yeah, we all have our stuff,
Yep.
So. Mhm.
Yeah, and I mean, I have so many questions in regard to everything that you were saying, but I do want to hear, Bobby, a bit more about
Sure.
your backstory and how everything
I'd rather hear about Bobby too.
Any day of the week. Oh, well, let's see, how far do you want to go back? Just a couple of years before I met him, or?
Well, I think you have a really interesting backstory even
Yeah.
when you were so much younger, and it seems like everything kind of came full circle to where you're at now too. So, were you a mom?
Yeah.
Did
Yeah,
you?
well,
Mhm.
I'll just briefly go over my childhood and background and stuff. So I grew up in a divorced family, and we were, wild hellions. 5 kids, and my mom worked, and we just kind of raised ourselves pretty much. But and then I just had a really kind of traumatic childhood where I ran away from home and was just, I think, looking for attention and love that I wasn't getting at home. And then actually had to, since I ran away from home, and then the authorities were like, you can't really go back to your home because it's not really a decent home to go to. I got put in a girls' home in a girls' school and stayed there until I was like 16, and then moved into what they called a group home. But it was amazing how when I finally got structure in my life and parameters around what I was doing, that all of a sudden I was like, yeah, life is, I straightened right up and was getting good grades, graduated high school, and had some good people in my life that really helped me turn around. So that was great. Whereas, a lot of my friends were getting killed, and dying from drug overdoses, I felt like I really had an angel watching over me at that time. So, but anyway, then soon got married and had my first son, and then that didn't work out, and then got married a second time and really tried hard to make that work because I didn't want to raise my kids in a divorced home like I was. And so, it went well for a while, but it just started to fall apart, and we reached out for help and tried everything we could. And I love marriage. I love family. And so more than anything, that's what I always wanted in my life, was to have a close family, trying to probably replace the family that I didn't have. And it wasn't possible. And so just with heavy grief and heart, at one day a friend said to me, hey, yeah, I think you should do this bikini competition. And I was like, really? I'm 54 years old. And she goes, you could do it. You just have what it takes, and you should do it. And I was at such a low point, because I was at that point in life where I was like, what, I've come this far in life, but I'm not really happy or satisfied the way my life is. And I need to do something for myself. Because so much of my energy and time was focused on trying to manage this relationship. And I felt like I was never going to grow really the way I wanted to, or expand into the kind of person that I wanted to be. And as I was reading, there was just so much consciousness out there about, fulfilling your life's destiny and just becoming who, God made you to be. And that's what I wanted for my life. But I just felt so stuck in the situation I was in, and felt like I was never going to be able to do that. But anyway, so when this opportunity came up, I thought, why not? Why not do something different, and something that is going to challenge me and help me step outside my box. So anyway, I did it, and it was in my wheelhouse because I was a personal trainer for, the past 15 years before that. So, and always in the fitness industry. So I went ahead and did it. And
However, the courageous thing is you had that skin disease.
Oh, yeah. So I think just living in such a stressful situation for so long had wreaked havoc on my immune system. And I had a thing called granuloma annulare, and it was an autoimmune disease. And my body just wouldn't fight it. It was like these little circles that were like all over my joints, like my knees. They started coming up my thighs. It was like on my feet, wherever your joints connect. That's where it was. And so I had it they took a little bit of a biopsy, and they said, yeah, it's like an autoimmune disease. Your body just isn't fighting it.
And they look kind of like ringworm.
It looked like ringworm. Yeah, I thought I'll never be able to wear shorts again. That's for sure.
And so then go ahead and stand in front of hundreds of people in a tiny bikini.
Yeah, well, I knew that, you know, you can tan and get it covered up and stuff like that.
Still.
So
that's can I say ballsy?
Yeah.
That's
lady balls.
Big lady balls. That's really gutsy. Gutsy, probably a better word.
Yeah. Well, so then once I did it, I mean, it's, I don't even remember when it happened, but I just remember that, you know, doing something for me and stepping outside of my comfort zone, but chasing after a goal and having that focus helped to take my mind off all my problems and worries and concerns and put me in a positive headspace. And I think that more than anything, and maybe, I don't really know, combined with like super clean eating for about 16 months, 4 months, or 16 weeks and 4 months, really helped to, you know, boost my immune system. And, you know, and it was gone. So, and then it was there too that I just decided, you know, I can't keep beating my head against a wall in a situation that isn't working anymore. So that also helped me to, you know, sadly, it was a very hard time to leave my marriage at that point. But then I met this amazing man. And, you know, at the same time, I was mentally going through a headspace where it was like, wow, I've, you know, stepped out of my box. I just feel really great right now. And then I met him, and ironically, the same thing happened to him when he swam the Willamette River. It was the same year and same time. And one of the first things he said when I met him was, you know, chasing your dreams and having hope is what helps cancer survive, people to move forward and move out of this kind of unhappy place that they're in, even though they're sick. And I could totally relate to that, because I think that's what happened to me. You know, it boosted my immune system when I reached out for something that made me feel hopeful and made me chase after my dreams. Yeah, it's kind of it in a nutshell.
Yeah, I love that. And it was so interesting to me, because I'm listening to both of you tell your stories, and in so many ways they're very different, but at the same time, it's like both of you had to go through this hardship and these struggles and really just completely start over and start fresh, and then find something for you to help you not only succeed, but just feel amazing, and just be in like this fantastic relationship, you know, that's what both of you, I'm sure, wanted. So I'm curious to know, a lot of what you both were talking about is how your health declined so much during these points in your life. And I know, Bobbi, you mentioned that it had to do with you being in this relationship and trying to make something work that wasn't working. Dean, what do you feel like for you? I mean, cancer, it's interesting because so many people have different views about what causes cancer, but do you feel like there was anything specific that led to decline in your health?
Oh, absolutely. I believe there are two main reasons for cancer. One is environmental. Maybe you're just in a place like I was, a small town in Kansas, where the water table had just been so poisoned by decades of pesticide use and by an oil refinery. That little town of 13,000 had 15 people with Parkinson's. It had like 10 people that had just died in the last 5 years with brain tumors, and all sorts of folks with blood cancers. So I think it can be environmental. However, I'm not sure that's what it was for me. The other, and I think this is 2/3, if not more, of the reason that many of us have cancer is either it's what we're doing with our minds that's affecting our bodies. There was a pretty interesting German study done by a German researcher about 5 years ago that showed that within 1 year after a significant trauma, many of the cancers appear. And so I think it has to do with trauma. I also think it had for me to do with stress. Like I told you, I was just working like crazy. But for the last 10 years, I'd started specializing And this is why I wrote the book on acquaintance rape, on sexual trauma. So 30, 40 hours a week, all day, every day, I heard the most horrible stories you can ever imagine. Think of the worst movie where you've seen some kind of sexual trauma, and then make it real and make it 10 times grittier and a lot worse. And I was hearing that hour and after hour, every day, all day for a decade. And I was meditating and taking care of myself, but it's the hubris of the male ego. I thought I was pretty much Superman. And the normal things don't really apply to me. It's too bad the rest of the world has those problems. I hope I didn't think it that badly, but I just didn't have enough respect for secondhand trauma and how much I was just sponging all that trauma in, and how finally it just took a turn for the worse. So I think a lot of it was just hearing those stories. And these are people I cared about. Some of them I'd taught 20 years earlier or gone to church with, and so these are people, and even if I hadn't known them before they came to see me, you end up caring about the people you work with. And so these are people that I cared about that had gone through these terrible things. And it just was a slow erosion of my health, I think.
Yeah, plus one little girl had gotten killed that he'd had in his in one of his classes as a teacher. And the boy that was in the class too was the one that killed her.
Yeah,
so
I taught him.
It was a sexual.
I met him first when he was 5 years old. I taught swimming lessons and had the little kids because nobody wanted them. And I thought they were so adorable. And he was just an odd kid. And then I had him in 6th grade, and I tried to get him help several times. And his mom finally just griped me out and says, "Oh, you're just trying to get more clients for your therapy." And I'm like, no, he wouldn't come to me anyway. Something's wrong with your son. He needs help. Well, come to find out, they think he'd been a serial killer in his late teens because he kidnapped, raped, and murdered this dear, sweet little girl that I'd also had in school. And it was a tragedy that no one in this tiny little town thought would ever happen. And in a small little Mayberry existence like we had. And when they found the body, it was staged like a serial killer would stage it. And they later found, as they looked all along I-45, like 7 or 8 girls that had been staged that same way. And so he's in jail for life. But that really shocked me. And that was the reason I started writing the book, because I thought, man, we got to do something to help girls see this stuff coming.
Wow. So your heart was in the right place, and you really felt like you were tapping into your own and serving your purpose, but It was also destroying your health. I mean, that I can't even imagine how that must feel to like let go of something that you put your life's work into that's so important.
Yeah, and I didn't let go of it. I just tried to be more reasonable with it. One of the things, there's something called a mind-body conversation. They found up at University of Washington, if they get people down into a hypnotic state and ask them, they did this with brain tumored patients, they'd ask them, do you have a brain tumor, yes or no? If they said yes, they'd ask, where is it in your brain as far as front, back, up, down, and is it malignant? And they found 87% of the time that people would know. And so one of the researchers went off on his own after that and just he thought, well, if that works for brain tumors, it'll work for anything. So he started developing something he called mind-body conversations. And I'd read about this a couple years before my first time with leukemia, that if you'll get down into a meditative state and just ask your body, the body's so wise it will tell you. So after about a couple weeks of just sheer terror after the diagnosis, I finally settled down enough to remember that. And so I got in a time of meditation and I asked my body, I talked directly to the leukemia, and Louise Hay, probably a lot of your folks have heard of her. She was like the mother of mind-body conversations.
It's amazing.
And she did this with a lot of people who had AIDS back during the AIDS epidemic in the 90s. She would get them to talk directly to the AIDS. And so I talked directly to the leukemia, and it says, I hold on to anger and I nurse my fear. Well, that didn't really make much sense to me, but as I just allowed myself to think about it, I could see what that meant. I would get angry and just not explode, but just hold on to it as part of my stress. And I was scared constantly of what was going to happen to my clients, or was the insurance going to pay, just the normal wear and tear of daily life. But I would, then once I heard that, I thought, in order to get better, I've got to become really good at never holding on to any negative emotion. And so I started something I call clearing out. Every night before I go to sleep, I will review my day, and if there's anything I'm still holding on to, I try to release it prayerfully before I'll go into sleep, so that I can start each day fresh. And I think that's a really, really good practice that everyone should use, because one of the things I've noticed over the years is nobody starts the day fresh. Everybody's just carrying the chains from weeks, months, years, decades in their life. And that's why they're always feeling so drugged down.
Yeah. I love that. I mean, as someone who is really into mindfulness, and I've done hypnotherapy, I'm always trying to tap into, my subconscious mind and listen to what my body and mind are telling me. But I think at night I'll sit down and I'll write out, okay, what are my main goals that I want to focus on? But for me personally, as someone who's like a high achiever, I think you can get sucked into like, this, I'm excited about what I'm going to do without thinking too much about what am I holding on to that's going to drag into tomorrow, that's going to hold me back from accomplishing what it is. And like you were saying, there's so many people who talk about, oh, I'm always tired, or
right.
This and that and this, and sometimes you don't think like maybe it's because there's just something deep down inside that you're not dealing with. And for that, people really don't know how to let go. It's so easy to tell somebody, oh, just let it go.
Right.
Yeah.
The mind is very powerful, and fear is very hard. And I think what we often try to do is control it. We want to have our control over our brains. So for both of you guys, what's the difference between letting go of those subconscious maybe thoughts and fears that you're holding on to versus trying to control them to feel better?
I think first you have to recognize them. I don't think a lot of people know what, even if they're consciously aware, they just don't feel right, and so I think it's just getting into that state where you can hear your inner voice talking to you and telling you. And a lot of times that, for me, I know that took meditation to really get quiet inside. And then I'd have like an epiphany, like, oh, that's what I was feeling. And this situation happened. And that's what took me to this thought that started a loop in my conscious thinking. And then I created this in my life because of that. So, I think, you hear it a lot today, but it's so true. We just really have to get quiet and listen to ourselves. And, we're so busy in life. There's just, go, go, go all the time. So to make that time for yourself to slow down.
Yeah, I think Bobbi's absolutely right. It takes time and it takes practice. You've got to develop a routine that works for you, and you've got to, I call it the care and feeding of the soul. You really have to take time to wash all of that junk that you absorb during the day out of your spirit. because the subconscious never sleeps, and it's massive. And one of the latest theories as to why we dream is our subconscious trying to absorb and negotiate all the things that we felt that day. And it's really trying to take care of all of those feelings. And so if you take something into sleep, it's going to chew on it and basically grow it all night long. And so I just like brushing my teeth before I go to bed. I want to wash all of that out before I take any of that junk into sleep. Yeah.
Mhm.
And everybody, it's fun, as I've taught thousands of people how to do this. And I'll give them a couple little exercises, but I'll say, hey, be very open to the way your heart leads you and your own personal technique, because everybody has a unique way of doing it. And once they find their way, then it's easy, natural, and it's much more likely to be continued. So.
I love that. Well, do you ever have any unique cases where, I know for me personally, sometimes when I say meditation or mindfulness, people like scoff at the idea. And I know, like, when I first started, I remember I had to do like a discussion board about it. And I was like, all I could think about was this pain in my back. Like, it was just annoying, you know, and you get frustrated with yourself because you're like, oh, I have to bring myself back to the now, and to be non-judgmental of your thoughts is, it takes quite some time. So for the people who maybe, like, you know, when you first start working with them, I think both of you guys teach meditation. Is that right?
Right.
Yeah. You know, what are some kind of outside the box approaches that you've had to use for people who are less inclined to fall into the, like, oh, mindfulness and meditation works?
Well, I think, and I learned this from him, it's like, you know, you don't have to sit up and, you know, cross your legs and do the, yeah, just lay down on your back, be comfortable. And I mean, sitting up is a great way to do it too, but, you know, start where you're at. And so, and then there's so many great meditation tapes out there, you know, or meditation, you know, on YouTube, or, you know, be careful because, you know, you want to be careful what you're putting inside your mind too and listening to. So, but we found some that really help us at night. And so we just do it, you know, just work it into your lifestyle. You know, we do it before we go to bed at night. We always listen to a meditation tape, and it helps you to fall asleep. And even if you're sleeping, you're still taking all of that good stuff in. And find one that you like and be consistent with it. And, you know, or, you know, start your day that 10 minutes of quiet. Or a lot of times we'll wake up to just going over what we're grateful for. And that helps too.
Yeah. And, you know, I just try to help. I many times, if I know a person is going to have that kind of reaction, I don't call it meditation or mindfulness. I just tell them it's really important to enter the night having zeroed out or cleaned out. I use those kinds of words. Or settled down. I had one old horse rancher, an old cowboy that was almost 70, and he was just a tough old guy. The only guy that ever wore spurs to therapy. I heard him coming down the hall. I'm sitting in my office. I hear this cha-chink, cha-chink. I'm like, what is that? And then I walk out, and there he is, and he's got spurs on, and I'm like, well, I'll call him Bert. I said, well, Bert, nice to meet you. I said, this is a therapy first. He was like, what's that, doc? And I said, never had anybody wear spurs to therapy. And he's like, you want I should take them off? And I'm like, no, you can keep them on as long as you promise not to use them on me. And he just kind of looked at me like, that's weird. I mean, he didn't get it at all, but I thought it was pretty funny. But with him, what I did was I found out, because he loved his horses so much, and that was kind of the language he spoke. I said, certainly you just don't throw the horses in the corral at night or the pen. What do you do? He's like, oh, I brush them down, Dean. I brush them down. And I said, well, how can you brush down? Because he just lost his wife. I said, how can, and this was way before I lost mine, how can you brush down some of these awful feelings of missing your wife? And he's like, well, that's a good idea. And if I'd have said, well, we need to meditate, he'd be like, oh, I think I need to go, Dean.
Yeah.
So,
put it in their language.
you got to put it in their language, but it's all pretty much the same thing. It's just taking care of yourself on the inside as well as the out.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. And before I forget, there was something that you mentioned earlier that I wanted to touch base on, is how you mentioned that you thought you knew so much about grief, and then when it happened to you, you're like, I know nothing. And that's very humbling for someone who, you know, has all these degrees and you've been in this field for so long and you've read all these textbooks. Like, what did that look like? What is the difference between knowing and understanding it, you know, just from what working with the clients versus going through it yourself?
Yeah, humbling is a great way to describe it, because I mean, I'd had some things happen in my life, and so I thought I really could kind of understand what it was like, but I just had no idea, because before Mary died when I was 50. And before that, the only time I'd really cried that I could remember is when my daughter was born.
Wow.
I just, you know, people would watch a Hallmark commercial or a mushy movie and get all teary-eyed, and I'm thinking, oh, brother. Or people would come to therapy and they'd cry, and I would tell them it was okay, but somewhere in the back of my mind, I'd be like, yeah, that's not me. I'd never do that. And when Mary died, I couldn't talk about the weather without crying. One time I went, it was about 9 months after she died, and I needed to take her name off of the checking account. And I sat down with the bank teller, and I went to tell her, and it took 3 times, and I still couldn't get it out. So she took me back to her cubicle, and I taught her in 6th grade about 20 years earlier. And she's like, oh, Mr. Hall, I'm so sorry. And I'm like, yeah, me too. And I just cried and cried and cried. It took half an hour for me to even tell her all I wanted was to take Mary's name off of my checking account. It's things like that I didn't know how pervasive that kind of deep grief was, and how at 10:30 every night, I'd go to bed, make sure my daughter was okay, and because she was a senior in high school when this happened, make sure she was fine, and then basically run to my bedroom because I could feel myself start to cry. And I'd cry for 2 or 3 hours and think, oh my gosh, what have I turned into? So part of it was so deep, and it was so odd for me to have these kinds of experiences emotionally. I felt like I'd lost my sense of identity, because, you know, here I am, some kind of mushy guy crying all the time. And yeah, it was just, it was really a sense of not only loss of this person I loved, but loss of who I thought I was. I thought I was some kind of tough guy, but not so much. Yeah.
So now you have a much deeper understanding of what other people go through.
Yeah, and know that I don't know. The funny thing is now, though, that when people walk in, I never tell them, or very, very rarely tell them. I really don't have to. I can't tell you how many times I sat down with a client and they haven't even read my bio or anything, and they sit down with me and they start talking, and they're like, but you know. I'll say, what? And they'll say, you know what I'm feeling. And I'll say, well, why would you say that? And they say, we can just tell.
Oh, that's wild.
Yeah, it's happened so many times. It's not even funny.
Yeah. People just intuitively know so much.
Yeah, one lady said it was by the questions you ask and the knowing look in your eye.
Oh, okay.
Which made me cry.
Aww,
And I'm like, well, yeah, now the knowing look is all watered down, so.
No, that's awesome. Thank you so much for sharing, because I think so many people when they're going through grief, they're so hard on themselves,
Oh
you
yeah.
know, especially guys like who, you know, have that like not me tough
Yeah.
exterior. So
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
That's
I,
so hard.
yeah, I love that you said that. And for you, Bobby, I think when it's childhood, especially when you go through trauma and you know
Yeah.
you feel unloved, like your brain is still growing so much, so that definitely can translate into adult life if you don't do anything about it. Did you feel like there was a lot in your adult life that came from your
Oh,
childhood?
oh yeah, yeah, yeah. In fact, it was kind of like it was hard for me to weave or to differentiate. Was this, that's why I think I stayed in my marriage for so long trying to work it out, because I really felt like, at first it was probably my fault, and all of my fault, and of course, he wanted me to believe that. And then finally, once we started getting help and growing in that direction, then he kind of assumed more responsibility. But I think it definitely affected my relationships, absolutely. So, and I feel like now, just over the last couple of years, I've really been healing from a lot of that trauma in my childhood, because there was a lot of trauma and a lot of not feeling loved, for sure.
Really?
So, and
And
you take that into your,
a lot of you just being on your own.
yeah.
Because that's one of
Oh
the
yeah, I was
things,
pretty much just raised myself.
You have to do
Very
it.
independent.
especially early on in our relationship, I just
I don't need
expect
anybody.
her to depend on me because that's kind of how I was raised, tight-knit family, and she just didn't, and it would shock me, and I'd be like, no,
And you don't have to do this alone.
yeah, you're part of a team, I'm here.